All right, our presenter today is Dr. Linda Mathias Kaskel. As I said previously, she's going to get us really started in the direction of looking more specifically at the how-tos. We've had a lot of overview, a lot of general good information, I think, that's gotten us on the right track, but I think everybody's ready for some real how-to type of stuff. So, Dr. Linda Mathias Kaskel, thank you.
Linda works. I'm okay with that. I have psych students this whole year, and they're the only ones that I know that routinely call me Dr. Kaskel, so I respond to anything. All right, is that loud enough, or do I need to move it up? Okay, let me know if that becomes a problem. What I'm sort of thinking of doing today is focusing it on actual examples that we've worked with as a team. We've changed enough of the identifying information that you shouldn't be able to actually walk down the street and pick out our kids that we're talking about, but enough information that these are real life cases that we've been working with. So the first thing I want to say, though, is my style is, hey, wait a second, not every slide that you're going to see on here is actually in your packet. So you can keep a list, and at the very back I have lindakaskel@yahoo.com. I'll be happy to send you more slides if there's stuff here that you really, really need to have for your own files. I hope that I've gotten most of the key elements for that. The way that the morning is planned is it's a lot of me talking, but I'm very happy to be interrupted with questions and discussion. And as we get more into the afternoon, I've twisted a few arms, and we're going to have a role play of an actual team process to develop a behavior plan on a pretty tough kid. So my goal at this point for this training is to apply all of those behavior change strategies that we've talked about or that you've had training with, including our own behaviors. And so we're going to start and end the day focusing on what we need to change, and in the middle of the day talking about how we're going to change our students. We're going to talk about, or I'm going to show you at least, one technique that we use technology on how to train staff for consistency of a behavior plan. We're also going to talk about using all of those strategies on adapting maladaptive behavior and collecting data. At work, I have the reputation of being the data queen. It's not one that I actually like, but I'll share some of my ideas with you. And then lastly, as I said, we're going to actually use a team approach and go through the whole process of figuring out from start to finish, how do you collect the data, how do you put it into a plan, how do you check the plan for accuracy. We'll get there. All right, so the definition of change you have in your book. You're all here because you want to see some sort of change occur with the students that you're working with, whether that's behaviorally or academic. But change is really hard. And if I have, one of my team members has loaned me a magic wand. I'm not sure it really works, but we'll be using it today. I've been told that change is hard for the kids that we're working with, the parents that we're working with, and it's very hard for us. And I haven't found the magic wand to get everything to work, but I think we have some ideas in terms of how to focus that. Change is important, though, and what I would like to try to keep that is change doesn't always have to be from the negative to less negative. Sometimes change is for the better, and that's the way I like to look at it. But the reality is, for change to be really effective, we need to be very involved in our own reflection of what we're doing before we expect change to occur, and that how we interact with people or what we're doing oftentimes can be the antecedent to some of the behaviors that we're looking at. This is my favorite quote. The team that I work with is really tired of hearing it. But insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. And so today what I hope to do is change that doing the same thing over and over and give you some different perspectives of what we're going to do. The first is what we do over and over again is the idea of making New Year's resolutions. And so in this cartoon, I'm not sure if you can see it in the back, it says, "This year I resolved to procrastinate less. Honey, today is January 9th. See, I'm better already. Last year I made the same resolution on February 15th. I did a little research to figure out what the top 10 resolutions that people make. So take out that little pad of paper next to you and just jot down what you think number 1, number 2, and number 3 is. And then I'll actually share with you what the research, those people who do all those polls, so then you can actually see. Okay, number 10, get more organized, cut that clutter. Number 9, help others, volunteer somewhere. Number 8, learn something new. If that was one of your New Year's resolutions, Happy New Year. Get out of debt, quit drinking, enjoy life more. I like that one. Quit smoking, tame the bulge. Yeah, by the way, this thing going on my hip are 2 microphones and not extra bulge on my thighs there. Fit and fitness goal. And the last one, spend more time with family and friends. Were your 3 on there on the list? Okay, was it smoking and eating and working out, right? Those are the ones everybody thinks of, but look at how many other ones that we talk about. And I find it really interesting that one of the things that I hear a lot is if I were to do all the behavior plans that you are all asking me to do at my school, I would end up losing that time with family and friends. And so what I would like to say today is that we're going to work smarter, we're not going to work longer. And so you will have the ability to spend more time with family and friends. I think what's really interesting is if you look at the whole thing of New Year's resolutions, at first, if you don't succeed, you're part of the average. Look at the information. Within the first week, 25% of us have already broken and stopped our New Year's resolution. And within 6 months, over half of us have stopped. So when we talk about behavior change, think about how difficult it's been and what some of the things that have been difficult for you to be able to maintain. Why has that happened? And then we're going to continually look at the students we work at and ourselves today as behavior change agents. And I'll give you a clue. At the back of your handout is going to be your own behavior plan. What behaviors will you need to change? And so let me just direct you to that. It's the second to last page. It looks like this. So as you get ideas today, we're going to come back to that. But as we talk today, this is going to be your plan for success. What will you need? And I encourage you to go back to, it would be page 19 on your handout, to keep going back there and taking some notes for yourself. And we will have some time at the end of the day to actually look at that. All right, so how do we make sure that this is the year that those New Year's resolutions that you made actually work? Well, first of all, let's not think of them as resolutions. Let's think of them as goals. Oh, goals, that sort of works with what we need to talk about today. Rather than thinking about this huge task, I'm going to stop smoking forever, I'm going to lose 100 pounds, I'm going to totally be out of debt-free by 2 weeks from now. Rather than that, look at it as small goals that you can work on, and as you attain one, you can move on to the next step. And oftentimes, it's better to look at it monthly than, say, this whole big year. And for some people, it's better to even look at it every week. Come up with appropriate expectations. Rather than saying, okay, this is a year, I'm going to lose 100 pounds, consider the idea of losing 2 to 4 pounds a month. So if you have a week that's bad, you don't stop your New Year's resolution. The other part of that is 100 pounds in a year, unless they put you in a hospital, unless somebody comes twice a day with your food tray and with the nudge that you have an hour of physical therapy, it's unlikely, or unless you get your stomach stapled or something, that you're going to lose 100 pounds in a year. So how do you work that out to be more realistic? The other part of that is, when you say lose 100 pounds, what are you going to do that? So it's better to focus on what you can actually change. So rather than stop eating high-fat food, stopping, what is the replacement behavior? We all need to decrease those annoying behaviors our students have or that we have, but we need to talk about what the replacement behaviors would be. So perhaps a better goal would be to eat more foods that are lower in fat. But perhaps even a better goal would be to say I'm going to start eating one new fruit or vegetable a week, or every day I'm going to make sure that I'm eating 2 vegetables or whatever. So now you have the replacement behavior. Rather than saying stopping eating the high greasy fat food, because that doesn't help us, what will I be eating? Because we all want to focus on something. And then reward those small successes. So you start to be good. Don't pay attention to those days that you went back to old habits. Pay attention to the successes. And then come up with the rewards that are linked to the goals. So the idea of saying, okay, when I lose that first 10, we're going to Old Country Buffet. Doesn't work. So what would be a better goal? Okay, you know that new outfit I want? When I get to 10 pounds, I'm going to go do that, or I'm going to go get a new haircut or a new pair of glasses or whatever. Align the goals to the rewards. Oftentimes we find that the rewards aren't connected to the goals, or if they are, they're exactly the opposite to help us obtain those goals. So while we talk about our own New Year's resolutions and how to make them better, this is also a way to make sure that our kids' behavior plans also work. All right, I went through the training book that you have gone through, and there's a couple of really key points that I want to just hit upon again. Behavior plans are mandatory. We're mandated to do them whenever we're talking about a placement like a suspension or changing to a more restrictive environment, and when behavior impedes on the child's learning or another child's learning. We need a lot of behavior plans for our kids. All behavior serves a specific communicative function. The problem is, can we always find out what that message is? And so today we're going to have some examples to try to show you some ideas of how to find the message. If it was only this easy. You know, I was noticing that with wolves in particular, that if you actually looked at the color and other kinds of marking, you get a real good idea about what they're trying to communicate. And their postures are also really good at communicating. If it was only this easy with our kids, right? We see one behavior, we automatically would assume it was something, and we could make the correction. We could all take naps in the afternoon too, like the wolves do, and be up all night. But it's not that easy. So all behavior is learned, and what we want to see, we're going to have to make sure that we're teaching. I think this is a different philosophy than when some of us were in school, where we learned how to teach the academics. We didn't focus on teaching the behavior. Data is important. Okay, you're going to hear this a lot from me. This is why I have the title of the Data Queen. But I'm going to show you some examples that when we're actually looking at behavior plans without data, we can't tell whether they're working or not. And data doesn't necessarily have to be the corporate nice little bar graphs that you see in this example. And you're going to see some examples later today of some things that aren't really fancy that can be done very quickly. We need to focus on what is actually changeable. Sometimes it's not possible when we have kids who are coming from low income and limited resources. We can't help them win the lottery. We can't change whether the kid is able to shower every morning. We can only change what's going on in our classrooms and in our schools. So we need to only focus on what we actually have the power to change. The other part of it is that when you look to someone like the psychologist, let me tell you how burned out you get when you're the psychologist and everybody says, go write me a behavior plan and come back in 10 days and tell me what I need to do. Teamwork is really, really important. That when we all sit down, we all have lots of ideas, and it really works. And those behavior plans, when we develop them as teams, work much stronger. All right, so when we look at behavior programs, there's a lot of discussion. What's the difference between a behavior management program and a behavior intervention program? And I like to think of it this way, although there are a lot of definitions out there. Behavior management programs tend to focus on the kid, tend to say that the individual has that problem, and we have to modify or change those problem behaviors. and that we try to come up with more socially acceptable ways. When we talk about behavior interventions, we're really talking about the system, the setting, what are the skill deficits are the problem. We have to make the changes in creating new experiences for students, creating new relationships or developing new skills. It's applied to all individuals. We don't just target that one person. It is proactive. We start to look at the system before it melts down, before we have broken furniture, injured individuals, etc. We try to come up with expectations that are reinforceable, and we try to link those to positive reinforcers. And that when we talk about it, it really is connected to what an organization feels like are its main reasons for existence. And interventions really work when we are most flexible. So I want you to take a minute and think about how can you be more flexible in the job that you're already doing. Okay? And I know there's a lot there, and if you're really interested in this slide, just mark down, I left you places to take notes, put a little star there and ask me to send you that slide. And as I said, for those of you who didn't get here early enough, my email is at the back, so I'd be happy to email you slides that you want. Another way to look at this is what are traditional approaches to behavior management, and typically that has been manual restraints, secluding kids, punishing them, putting them on medication as behavioral restraints, not on medications because of a medical illness. And last but not least, go ask the social worker or the psychologist to go do therapy with them. It hasn't worked really well. Taking a kid out of a classroom when they're misbehaving and they're perfect angels one-on-one, and you send them back to 20 kids and they don't behave, it doesn't work. So some of the evidence-based or research-based kinds of interventions and approaches that we've been talking about are more inclusive. How do you push in the service? What do you do in the classroom rather than pull them out? How do we continue to do what seems to be an enormous amount of positives to negatives for people? How do we establish those expectations so kids know? I've had a couple of teams that I've worked with where people have said to me, this is called bribery. Kids should already know this. If you find yourself using that should word about behavior, that might be one of your goals for the back, is to try to decrease the number of shoulds. Kids should do such and such. What I see, our kids are doing this. That's what we can only talk about. We can't talk about parents should be working with their homework more and should be taking them out in the community more and should. They're not. So what do we do? Again, focusing on those changeable moments. I'm going to repeat it again. Positives, use of data, teamwork, all really important. I'm not spending any time on talking about PBIS, and I think you've had some of this already in terms of the levels of PBIS and what needs to happen. But the reality is that as we move from those green areas to red, we need to be realizing that the problem is increasing in its intensity. The resources that we need to put into there are important to also increase. And so if you're coming from a system that hasn't increased its resources, then we have to do some problem solving around that and maybe give you some ideas of what you can take back home to how do you get more resources. And I don't necessarily mean resource equals money, although that would be lovely for all of us. We also know that as we go from green through yellow to red, we have to change the environment. The same environment doesn't work. We have to put in more structures to assist us. And then finally, again, this whole thing of data. We really do need to have more data as we go from green up to the red. This is not my idea. I borrow it from a colleague over at NSSED who said, you know what, in special ed, all of our kids are already yellow or red. So if we're talking about what can we do with changing that PBIS kind of pyramid for special education or for deaf ed, well, let's look at different levels, although it's interesting on my screen it's 2 levels of pink and then red, but okay, that yellow would work too. When we look at the yellow or beginning of the bottom of the special ed pyramid, we're talking about how do we set up those PBIS expectations for our classrooms or our schools or our programs. We look at different techniques for setting up classrooms for success and monitoring them for success. We need to be looking at how do we teach new skills and how do we find motivating positive reinforcers. As we go further up, the very last part is those individual behavioral supports. So that we still do have a lot to look at. But the one thing that you're going to hear me say a lot, again, is data collection, analyzing that data, and then using it in a problem-solving model. All right, the other part of that is give me the strength to know what I can actually change and what I can't change. And I think that when we talk about change, this is really an important one. We beat ourselves up a lot when we try to change things that we just can't have any control over. So here's my first case example for the morning. I was called in by a first grade teacher who complained that, oh my God, these kids are walking horribly down the hall. And what the teacher aide for that classroom said is, there are just too many bad behaviors. I can't even start to count. And so what I ended up doing is going and following the kids just for a brief period of time. I do not exaggerate, 10 minutes, this is what I saw. The teacher was saying only about 22 times in that 10 minutes, stop it, stop it, stop it. She was also saying, don't touch that one, don't touch him, don't touch her. And she was also signing wrong a lot. Now, if I counted that teacher's behaviors, I have over 60 behaviors in that 10-minute slot from that teacher. So then I went and talked to her and said, yeah, I could see why you're tired of reminding kids that this is happening all the time. So the first thing I introduced the teacher to is the whole idea of you have to do 4-to-1 or 8-to-1. I've heard lots of different ratios. More positives to negatives. The other part that we talked about is that we had to actually be more directive. Tell the kids what you actually expect them to look like. Hands at your side, eyes forward, no touching, elbows distance, whatever those expectations were. And so we started to do that. We practiced that a little bit. We also found the teacher actually giving more positives to the kids, good walking. The kids would just beam in the beginning. A couple of weeks after that, good walking didn't have quite the same power, but we were starting to see some changes. So the first question we asked was, do the kids have the skills or are they just not performing it? And what we found out is that kids just didn't really understand what it meant to walk in the halls. And in some of the schools that I'm at, hearing kids are not really good models. They're like the drunken driver. They're up and down the halls this way. They're touching, they're bouncing off walls. What are our kids copying? So for a lot of them, we had to talk to the whole school and see that would be the ideal. In this situation, at first, the first year we were doing this, we only had our kids in the program and the school wasn't doing it. And then I'm happy to report that this year, the school has actually posted and practiced some of the expectations for all of the kids at the school. So now here's an example of a little bit too many expectations. So you'll notice that all of them begin with that magic no. Okay? Sometimes we need to hear what we're supposed to do, not what we're not supposed to do. So if your class rules all begin, even the 10 Commandments don't all begin with don't. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to be looking at your own class expectations. Start small, not all of the rules at once. Figure out ways that you're teaching people what you do want instead of what you don't want. So we sat down and we said to the team, what really bugs you about these kids walking up and down the halls? Well, at this school that I was at, they put a lot of things on the walls. Kids' artwork, notices, safety posters, all sorts of stuff. And our kids would come along and touch them and take them with them. And they'd be going along. And there'd be half the poster and half the poster still be on the wall. Our kids were also doing a lot of distracting. They were really loud going down the hall. They couldn't tell how loud their feet were as they were going. And any teacher, it was interesting to watch this group of first graders, Any teacher in their hall where the kids were actually heading to the bathroom or recess would come to their doors, keep talking, close the door, our kids would keep going down the hall. People weren't real happy with the fact that they were so distracting. The biggest one is because, you could tell that the teacher was constantly reminding them not to touch each other, was how many touches. They were like abundantly shoving each other, walk faster, no, come over here. They'd get into little elbow fights if people were too close. Lots of behaviors in terms of touch. And then finally, we actually had a few injuries. This is not a good thing to talk about. But, one kid ended up slicing part of their finger because they got it caught on a rough edge of a locker as they were doing this thing going down the hall. Another kid actually tripped over another kid stopping to tie his shoes and not paying attention. And we had just a few, but we weren't real happy with the fact that kids were getting hurt, even though they were, in many ways, paper cuts. But, we wanted to see some of those changes. So, as I said, we came up with the expectations. We reinforced the kids where we caught them being good. We tried to ignore those times that they hadn't yet mastered the new stuff. We stopped trying to tell them, no, 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 wrong, 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 and we worked to find when they were good. And we just kept using all the standard teaching principles that we know of how do we teach kids. And here's what ended up happening. So, with data, we can actually trace it. So you'll see in September, we had a high number of all of those behaviors. And that we started to do training end of September, beginning of October. Look at the behaviors are going down. It's looking really good. In fact, we were so proud. By November and December, we didn't have anybody getting hurt, thank goodness, and no more materials were being destroyed. Hey, we were feeling pretty good. Okay, then there was Christmas break. Look what happened to the data in January. You notice that I did not want to show you that at first. Okay, it almost went up as high as it had been before. Lesson of this, kids go home, they forget what they've learned, right? You review math facts, you review spelling, you need to review the behaviors. But the good news is, with a little bit of reteaching, those behaviors went down again pretty well. And it really does reinforce that sometimes we teach it, we have to teach it again, we have to teach it again. So this is one example of how we did it for the whole group. And it's interesting, by switching and doing some of this, there were other behaviors that we were working with individual kids that we also saw start to come down. So the lessons that we started to learn, as I said, was that consistency in training and needing to continue it, and also reteaching after breaks. I have some other bullet points up here. Anybody else have a similar situation where they would like to share some of the successes or lessons they've learned by doing these group lessons? Okay, it's early. The coffee hasn't kicked in. I see that. Thank you.
I was just saying to her that we do PBIS at my elementary school, and the first day back from winter break, we spent the whole morning doing cool tools, which is our way of practicing all of our focused behavior goals for the school year.
And how do the kids respond to that?
Really well.
So doing the cool tools at the beginning, the first day back after break has been successful in more than just my program. I'm glad to hear that. We don't work together, and I did not pay you to say that, right? Okay. All right, so what would you do if you knew you could not fail? So my next example of a kid is one that, and when we look back, we're like, okay, this makes sense. All right, so I get called in as the psychologist to please come and look at little fill-in-the-name kid. She is having a lot of quote-unquote trouble learning. That really helps me, right? They're very distractible. Well, so I go in and I do my little data collection, and within just a few minutes, here's what I'm noticing. The teacher has set herself up in front of the chalkboard. Hanging from that chalkboard are lots and lots of posters and pieces of work and the daily schedule and lots of other things. The thing that I noticed most, though, was a set of videotapes. They were all lined up in a little shelf. And what ended up happening is I was coming in about an hour before free movie time. What were the kids doing? They were picking out their movies. Not just the one kid I came to observe. Most of the kids were over there squinting and trying to figure out Mary Poppins from Dora from the rest of the ones that were up there. We made one change. There was no other place to put the videotapes, because I would have liked to have had the videotapes completely gone. But instead, we took a pillowcase. We put it in front of the videos, and first of all, 6 of the kids started paying attention. Just one little pillowcase. It could be a towel, it could be something. We covered up the videos. We then decided that there were still a couple of kids that were distracted by the fact that they were present, and so we started out the day picking the video at calendar time. We all voted and we picked out the video. We put the video into the VCR, said goodbye to the video, and went back to calendar time and continued. And all of a sudden, that little environmental change and that change in routine, huge. Kids were starting to pay attention more. Because all the teacher had to do is point to the VCR, which is the other way, saying, are we ready? Are we getting ready? You know, we could start earlier if you're paying attention. If we get this finished, we started telling them what to expect rather than they're all over the place. And so what we really have learned from this example is how do we arrange our classrooms? We have many tasks we need to be looking at. We need to come up with stimulating learning environments. But sometimes stimulating environments are overstimulating. So is there a way? You know, I was interested when I was taking my daughter to visit colleges. I visited, it was either a science or a math class, and they had these blackboards that had numerous ones, and it was like closet doors. You could like slide one open and then you could move over. And this one professor was like just taking notes up, you know, and kept sliding the next one over and sliding the next one over. And I kept thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we could have something like that in our classrooms? And so I gave this analogy to the teacher that I was working with, and what we ended up doing was taking some of the rules and the daily schedule, and we put them on poster boards. And we laminated them, and we'd put it up in front of the chalkboard, and then we'd put it down when we were done teaching. And then we'd have it right there, and there was a blank poster board that these all went into. Well, after a while, they were starting to fall on the floor, and what this one teacher ended up doing is taking a portfolio case like art students have, and putting all of the poster boards in there. So they were held nice and clean, but the teachers could then pick the poster that they needed. Again, a small change to the environment that helped. So yes, we want to stimulate their little brains, but we also don't want to overstimulate them with too much to focus on. And so as today, I'm talking to you with all this stuff up here, and I can scan this room right now and tell you that about half of you are just taking it in, listening to me, and writing. You're either reading over here or you're writing down, but you're not paying attention visually. That works for some of you in this room, and others of you, it would be better if I did this while I was talking. If I really wanted to get your attention to pay attention to me as the speaker, I got all this stuff going on behind me that's not going to help. Okay? And so sometimes technology and overheads are great, and sometimes we need to pull the plug on them so that there's nothing behind us, so the kids really do focus on the messenger and not just the message. So we have to think about that. I also had a couple of kids that the room was divided up into a number of stations. And the speech therapist would come and pull one of the kids at the time, like almost in between two of the stations. And so there were a ton of kids walking back and forth behind this kid. Well, we know that some of the kids we work with have better eyes behind their heads than they do in front of their heads, and they were much more aware of the kids passing by than the speech therapist in front of them. So one technique that I see a lot of teachers use is, oh, let's just move the screen or the little card chart right in front, right behind the kids, so that we take some of the congestion away. What else do we need to do to the classroom? I think we spend a lot of time paying attention to, do we have a kidney-shaped table? Do we have individual desks? But whatever we have, the question is, can all of the students be supervised by the seating arrangement? And can all the students see one another? Because if they're all looking at you, your responsibility to be the only communicator then exists. And so think about which classes and how you arrange that to be able to have all the kids be able to see. Other things you've done in your classrooms to make them changes that you found that have been more successful in changing the environment? All right, at break, you'll talk amongst yourselves. I can see. All right. So, third case before we, what time do you usually take a break? 10:45, got it. Okay. If the coffee kicks in before it, it may be even earlier than that. I get it. So, my next case that I have here is a kid who we were presented with, and everybody said, oh, we can't do anything with this kid. Send him to another school. They sent him to our program instead. It was lovely. Someone who's always trying to do something someone else said that was impossible. And I think that oftentimes we get those kids, and sometimes we're pretty successful with them. So this is Annie. So the questions that I was hearing with Annie when she came into our program was, you know, I even doubt a behavior plan's going to work for Annie. We as a staff just don't have the skills to work with her. Our environment is not really suited for her. She's just a tough kid, and maybe we need to find another school for her to be at, not at our program. Please, get rid of her. I couldn't do that. The parent really wanted Annie to be at the site that she was at. So, let me give you just a typical day with Annie. She came in, leaving her cab, you know, we place bus by cab. She comes by herself or with one other kid. She started to cry. She was refusing to carry her things into the building. At her locker, there was a lot more crying and a lot more refusing. She laid on the floor. She was rubbing her body on the floor, so she was sort of doing a snake move, and there were other kids in the hallway. You could just imagine this. We finally got her in the classroom, and the teacher's saying she's refusing to follow any easy directives that we know she can do to get to calendar time. And all of a sudden, she was hitting everybody. We don't know. And the question that I constantly get is, there are no antecedents. Stop asking me that question. Okay? Let's turn back the clock. Let's look at the last 18 hours in Annie's life. Bear with me. This is a lot. Okay, at 3 o'clock, she's waving goodbye as her cab's leaving, and there's a smile on her face. She hits road construction. Welcome to Northern Illinois. Her cab is now taking about 15 minutes longer to get home. That means that she's probably been in the car for about 50 minutes, maybe almost an hour. She has a toileting accident in the cab. At home, her mom says, hurry up, we got to get going. She changes her clothes and gets rushed out to get in the car to drop off her brother and her brother's friend to soccer practice so that she can make it to physical therapy on time. You know, she has weekly physical therapy. It just so happens that's the day. Her physical therapist has her doing all sorts of new exercises. And by the time you can see, Annie is really tired at the end of her physical therapy. We throw her back in the car. Her brother and her brother's friend have been dropped off back at the house. And now Annie is interrupting their play and getting into a lot of rough and tumble play with her brother and his friend. It's now 6 o'clock. It's after 6 o'clock. It's dinner time. Mom's been trying to break up the rough and tumble play, and the pasta got overcooked. Annie doesn't like it. So Annie pushes her plate to the floor. The dog eats the pasta. The dog throws up. Mom cleans up the mess. Her sister, thank God for this older sister, goes and makes a turkey sandwich with. Annie picks that. She's not really fond. And she doesn't eat peanut butter. She's allergic to peanuts. So Mom now is, you know, things have gotten calm. Mom now is helping her brother with her homework, and her sister is on the phone, but she's also trying to help Annie do her homework at the same time. Annie gets frustrated. Annie tears up her homework. Mom writes a note to teacher, has Annie put the note in her backpack. This is important. Keep that one in mind. Now, it's finally 7:45. It's now bath time. Annie loves her bath. It is calming. How many of us like to take a bath, right? It is calming, right? So for some of us, Annie is finally in a happy space. At 8:15, Annie is in her pajamas. She is sitting on the couch. She is waiting for Dad. Her routine is Dad reads her a bedtime story. That phone call that sister was on earlier was Dad from the airport. Weather-related delays, Dad's not home yet. Annie is not going to budge. Okay, Annie is still waiting. Only Dad can read her story. It is now 8:45. She should have been in bed. She should have already been asleep. She is very tired. She is crying, but she is refusing to go to bed. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. She's still refusing to go to bed. Her brother goes to bed, although how her brother can fall asleep is impossible. And in about 15 minutes now, her brother is now complaining about the noise level that this child is creating. I'm surprised the neighbors haven't started to complain from how Mom has described this time. Okay, so her sister plugs in her video that she likes to watch. It's questionable whether that video is really appropriate. Mom convinces the sister to watch one of the videos that Annie could also watch. So the two of them, now Annie falls asleep on the couch. Mom makes a mistake. She carries Annie to bed. In the process, she wakes Annie up. Annie runs back downstairs, and she is going to continue to wait for Dad. Now imagine poor Mom, how she's feeling in all of this. And this is a good mom. I just want you to know this. It's a good mom and Dad. Okay, so Mom then decides, okay, it's 10 o'clock, the dog needs to go out. You know, this poor dog's already had an upset stomach. We do not want this dog at home all night without going out for the 10 o'clock walk. Annie's not going to have Mom leave. Dad's not there. So sister takes that. Now, it's almost sister's bedtime. Sister goes and gets her clothes and goes and takes the dog out for a walk. Annie is still wide awake. There's a lot more negotiating. Annie is not going to let Mom read her that story. Mom is exhausted and Annie is still awake, and it's 10:30 at night. Mom now starts making lunches and decides to get Annie involved in making school lunches. Which lunchbox? What do you want? You know, trying to appease Annie. Finally, around 11 o'clock, Annie falls asleep, holding the book that Dad is going to read to her when Dad finally gets home. Mom has fallen asleep in a chair next to Annie. Mom is not in bed yet. Okay, it's now midnight. Dad is finally home. The dog starts to bark. Annie's wide awake. She wants her story. Dad, now who's been traveling for 18 hours, the last thing Dad really wants to do is read a story. So he starts to make that story really short. We've all done this with our kids, right? Skip 2 pages. Annie knows this story. Annie is not happy. We have to start at the beginning of the story again. So at this point, the siblings and the dog and Mom and everybody probably in the neighborhood is back awake. Okay, Dad takes Annie up to her room, puts her in her bed. Mom finally gets to go to bed. Annie and Dad are still awake. You've been late. I want another story. Okay, so we continue. Annie finally falls asleep at 1:15 in the morning. Mom and Dad at 2 are finally asleep. At 5 a.m., the alarm goes. Now, we can all do this math. Mom and Dad have had less than 4 hours of sleep. What are we all like with less than the amount of sleep we need? These parents do need more sleep. Mom showers, she gets dressed, she once again walks the dog. Dad showers and dresses. It's now 6 o'clock, now time to wake up the other kids. Dad first wakes up the older sister, she showers. Mom wakes up the brother. Dad helps sister with the part of her homework that only Dad could help with the science or math part that Mom just went, I don't know. Brother is in the shower. Mom decides, I'm going to make Annie's favorite breakfast. I know it's going to be hard, but I'm going to make those pancakes with the little chocolate chips in them because I know Annie really likes those. Dad wakes up Annie. Annie does not want to wake up. Surprise, surprise. And she is yelling and she is throwing things in her bedroom. Her brother and sister are eating the favorite pancakes. And Dad is now, it's 7 o'clock, and Dad is ready to leave the house. Annie wants another story. She's like using the whole guilt thing. You've been gone, I want another story. Dad says no story, and there is tons more yelling going on. Okay, it's now 7:15. Brother picks up his lunchbox that Annie has helped pack. He runs to the bus, but Annie is upset. She is screaming at him, bring my lunchbox. I want your lunch. I want your lunch. Brother gets on the bus with the lunchbox. Sister now has missed her bus, and Dad needs to leave, and so Dad is trying to get sister a ride to school, and Annie's hearing all of this and saying, So Dad stays with Annie to get Annie dressed. Mom dashes out in her clothes to get sister to school and comes back. Okay, Dad is at home. Dad is not one quick dresser. So what is he doing? Hurry up, come on, hurry up, hurry up. No, we got it on backwards. No, hurry up, hurry up. Okay, Annie now is so upset she's not eating those pancakes. Plus, let's be honest, those pancakes have been sitting on the table for more than a half an hour. They're a little cold and rubbery. Mom is back. She knows she's been holding out. Annie has one other favorite lunchbox. She quickly takes the lunch from one and puts it into the surprise lunchbox, and that works. Mom warns Annie that the cab is going to be coming soon, and once again she hears hurry up, and there's a lot more crying. The cab honks its horn. Mom gives Annie choices. Are you ready to go in the cab, or should I drive you to school? Now, if Mom drives her to school, it is a 45-minute out-of-the-way trip, but Mom is willing to do this because, anyway, Annie says no, the cab, because her friend is in the cab. Except, we'll get to that. Now, at 8 o'clock the same day, her teacher is in a meeting. This is an important fact. Keep this one in mind. It is very warm in that cab, and now she's hitting that road construction coming back in. It's a long trip, and her friend is not in the cab. So Annie falls asleep. Now, the teacher runs into the classroom at 8:45. Her meeting has run long. No meetings in school ever run long, right? The school bell rings. Annie is not there yet. So now the classroom aide, who could be helping the teacher who's just run into the classroom, is standing by the door waiting for the cab. It's now 8:55. The cab finally arrives. The aide tries really quickly to wake up Annie. What does she say? Hurry up. There's a clue there. Annie barely gets out of the cab. The aide opens her backpack, sees that there is no homework in her. Remember, way back, many hours ago, Annie got frustrated and tore up her homework. The aide does not see the note from Mom. The free time in the classroom is done, so the aide needs to be back in the classroom to help, so the aide is rushing, and Annie falls on the floor. Here's some of the behaviors we started to see, crying and rubbing her body on the floor. The teacher takes Annie's hand, brings her into the classroom, once again saying, hurry up. Bring your chair to calendar time. Annie pushes the chair, and the chair falls to the floor. Annie hits another student, or at least tries to. There's a lot more yelling. The teacher is ready to call Mom to pick up Annie, but she sees me first. Okay, so now let's go back over that. What can be some of the antecedents? Okay, this entire family is sleep deprived. Annie needs to be on some sort of medication to regulate her sleep until she's ready to be back into a routine. Most of this family is getting little sleep, and her in particular has less than 6 hours of sleep. Annie is hungry. Let's think back to this. Annie has not finished dinner. The pasta ended up on the floor, remember, the turkey sandwich she was picking at, and then the pancakes were cold this morning, so she hasn't eaten. She also may be in a little bit of pain. She's been rough and tumble playing, and she was with the physical therapist yesterday. Her routine changed significantly in the last 18 hours. Dad was home late from business, her friend wasn't in the cab, and we had road construction going on. And we know when everyone is calm that the two words that will set Annie off like that are hurry up. Plus, she didn't get her little star in the morning for getting her homework in, even though she had a note from Mom explaining what had happened. So she lost her positive reinforcement. And then communication. She doesn't have the skills to tell what went on. The aide didn't see the note that Mom wrote, and while the mom left a message for the teacher before she left for work, the teacher came running in and hasn't probably seen or heard the message, and probably won't get to it till about lunchtime, when at that point all hell, excuse the language, has broken loose. So what are some of the plans then that we tried to put into place? Once we have a great parent who communicates all of this, and the humor, I did not display that, but as Mom talks about these behaviors, I would be bald by pulling out my hair. Mom just sort of rolls with all of this. This is a typical day. This is not an atypical day for Annie. So the first thing is we need to figure out how to deal with the fatigue. And because what we would like to do is have mom be able to call the cab and have the cab come and get her later, or let her go home early, it needs to be written into the behavior plan, because we are restricting her educational day. Even if though it's in her best interest, we are restricting her day. So we need to have that permission into her behavior plan. We also need to figure out a way to deal with the hunger. We have this problem a lot with many of our students because they're taking transportation and getting up pretty early to get to school. So some schools, and Annie's mom had no problem leaving healthier snacks for her to have. So we had like boxes of raisins, and we had little applesauce packs, and mom in fact had provided some yogurt containers. Many of our kids who are on free or reduced lunch, we have to work on also their behavior because of not eating breakfast. So we've worked on, for many kids, not just Annie, how do we feed them breakfast before we get our day started? Okay, coping with pain. Mom talked to the pediatrician, and really the idea was that maybe, given how constricted some of her muscles were, that maybe it made sense to give her a pain reliever, I don't remember if it was aspirin or Tylenol, before she went to PT, again after PT since she only has it once a week, and then perhaps even leaving for school the next morning. The pediatrician thought that was a good use of pain relievers. The other thing that mom really spent a lot of time with is this whole idea of whether there were some sensory integration issues, and that does come back up, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute. All right, it's hard to help Annie because her communication skills are pretty limited. And so one of the things that we decided to start doing, which we hadn't been doing before that, is to give Annie her own personal schedule. In a little bit, you'll see what that looks like. But I'm sure most of you have done this in lots of different ways. Board maker symbols or photographs laminated with a lot of Velcro at the back of it. We also came up with, mom and dad had a whole list. Hurry up was only one of about 10 phrases that they could identify that would really trigger her off. And so we put those particular triggers into a little chart that reminded staff to try to not use those words. And we came up with some other words that might work until those became triggers. And then we found a way to give her lots and lots of praise. Good job, you brought your backpack to your locker. Star. Good job, you unpacked your, so it wasn't just the homework star. She had lots of other opportunities to get those reinforcers. And then lastly, we really needed to find a way that Annie could have the ability to tell us it was a bad day. And so Annie was already being evaluated for assistive technology, and we actually did use assistive technology, and later you're going to see that. And one of the things that her talker box allowed her to have was a button that could be pre-recorded. So we saved one button for the teacher to be able to record a message to send home at the end of the day that Annie could just press and the teacher's message would come out. And we had another one with a picture of mom and dad on it that mom and dad could record in the morning, and Annie could come to school and just push the heck out of that button and tell us very quickly, not opening the backpack and not waiting to listen to our voicemail, about what the problem was. It worked out. In fact, that really worked out. I mean, Annie would not even take off her coat before she was pressing the button to say what was going on. It gave us a lot of clues. And mom's sense of humor would come through on these messages. And mom had, these cute little jokes she'd also throw in there to try to get staff to have a good day. So initially, we had this data where she was just all over the place. You've heard it. I don't need to show you that. We came up with the targeted behaviors, non-compliant behaviors, and we defined what those were, disruptive behaviors, and then physical aggression. Those were our 3 targets. Nothing, right? Just all those 3? We then came up with a list of what the replacement behaviors were that we wanted Annie to use. We wanted her to prepare for transitions. We wanted her to use a personal schedule. We wanted her to have a smooth transition between tasks. We needed to teach some of those. We wanted her to have more ability to express her needs and her feelings through using spoken language, through sign language, or her assistive technology, her talker. We wanted her to be able to request help from adults, and we put that into picture form, sign form, and on her talker. We wanted her to be able to integrate more and interact more with her peers. Annie needed to wear her glasses and her hearing aids. She would wear one or the other, so our replacement goals would be to try to get her to be using both. We wanted her also to talk about or to ask for a break in a way that was appropriate. Okay, so we had this beautiful plan. It was working. I'll show you the data in just a minute. We ran into a huge problem. Annie's classroom had a lot of staff that kept changing, not because of Annie, but because of one person got transferred out of state and somebody else was on maternity leave. And before long, there were staff coming and going all the time. Excuse me. The other part is that the rest of the staff in the building that worked with her, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, the speech therapist, needed to be more consistent in using the plan. Here you go. Here's the plan. Wasn't working. It was about a 15-page plan, right? That's the last thing you want to do is read this whole thing. So one of the things we came up with was the idea of actually putting a PowerPoint together, using technology, putting it on a disk, and what you're actually going to see is mostly the PowerPoint we put together for staff. All right, so recognize that all the pictures that have been in here have been replaced. They were of Annie. They are now of Google Images, okay? So if you happen to notice somebody you know in here, it's just because they're on Google. And some of the information we've changed. All right, so here's her story. We made sure that it was in her language so that you would remember before we began the real training, put this in a context that this is a kid that we're talking about. So it gives information. Now this is a treehouse Google image, but we actually had a picture of her real house there. And so it talks about who she lives with, her dog, what her favorite activities are. You get the idea. Then we have another slide here that gives people, this is really going through her behavior plan as it's written, but what is her whole health history? And so she has Down syndrome. She also is very nearsighted and needs her glasses. She also has a moderate hearing loss. She needs to wear her hearing aids. She doesn't currently take any medication, but she doesn't eat cheese, penicillin, because she's allergic to penicillin and mold. And this was also a kid who